They once kicked him out of the house just because he refused to live the life they planned for him. Now, he owns that very house, and they have to pay him rent. Want to know what happened between them? Stick around for this intense story. Troy Hale wasn't the kind of college student everyone could understand. At 21, he was about to graduate with a degree in criminal psychology. Sharp mind, freakishly good photographic memory, and one thing his parents never accepted: the ability to read people like flipping through a book. But in a house where reputation mattered more than happiness, skills like that meant nothing. The Hale family was the kind of family you'd see on the cover of a law magazine. His father, Donald Hale, was a senior partner at a law firm with offices across the country. His mother, Lorraine, was a former state judge, known for handing down ruthless sentences. In their eyes, success wasn't a flexible concept. It was a narrow, icy path that ran straight from Harvard to a law office. From a young age, Troy was groomed to be a lawyer. Family dinners revolved around lawsuits, judges, and arguments sharp enough to cut glass. If Troy ever brought up criminal psychology or deviant behavior, Donald would shut him down with a frosty dismissal. That kind of garbage doesn't pay the bills. Lorraine didn't say much, but every time he opened his mouth, her eyes looked like they were drafting an indictment against her own son. Troy endured it year after year. Every semester, every exam, every time relatives came over, he'd hear the same thing: going into law like your father is the right path. But no one ever asked what he wanted. Everything fell apart on a Thursday night. No warning signs. Just an ordinary dinner with lasagna dry as sand and the sound of silverware clinking on porcelain. Troy sat across from his parents, eating while trying to swallow the lump of frustration in his throat. He had just received a confirmation email from a behavioral analysis internship program in Washington. It was his dream. But he hadn't said anything yet, hadn't dared to, until Donald asked in a voice as sweet and poisonous as syrup-coated venom, "So how's the law school application process going?" Troy set his fork and knife down. He looked his father straight in the eye. Lorraine stopped eating too. "I didn't apply," he said, so calmly it surprised even him. No one said a word for 3 full seconds. Then Donald let out a short, dry laugh, the kind that sounds like crossing a name off a list. "Enough jokes. Tell me the truth." "I'm not joking. I'm not going into law. I'm going into criminal behavioral psychology." The rage hit like a flipped switch. Donald slammed his hand on the table hard enough to knock the glass out of place. "You want to be the damn joke of this family? Psychology? That useless crap? You really want to throw your life away on that?" "It's not useless. I'm good at it. I know what I want." "No one gives a damn what you want, Troy," his father growled through clenched teeth. "This family has standards. You're not dragging the Hale name through the mud for your stupid ego." "Then I won't use the Hale name anymore," Troy said, standing up. Lorraine still hadn't said a word, but her eyes felt like a blade carving down his spine. Then she said just one sentence: "If you walk out of this house, don't come back." "I wasn't planning to." Troy turned and walked up the stairs. Every step felt like it was tearing away at the past. He didn't cry, didn't shake, he didn't feel anything at all. Just a cold, hollow void spreading from his chest. He packed in 15 minutes. 3 sets of clothes, his laptop, a phone on the verge of dying. He didn't take any family photos, no awards, no destination. He hadn't thought they'd actually kick him out. Not really. When he came down with his backpack, his parents were still at the table. Neither of them looked at him. It was like he was air, a stranger who'd wandered into the wrong house and was now being removed because he didn't belong. He opened the door. It was pitch dark outside. No rain, but the wind cut sharp against his face. Troy stood on the front step, looking up at the house he'd lived in for over 20 years. No lights to say goodbye. No one seeing him off. Just a door closing behind him. He didn't know where he'd sleep. No plan, no cash, no friends close enough to call at midnight. But there was one thing Troy knew for sure. From that moment on, his life was no longer someone else's blueprint. And if he had to start from the bottom, he'd do it, on his own terms. That night, Troy didn't sleep. Not because he didn't have a bed, but because his mind wouldn't let him lie down. After 3 hours of wandering with a backpack and a dying phone, he knocked on the door of the last person he ever thought he'd ask for help. Hope Nash. Hope answered with a sleepy face and a glass of water in hand. The warm light behind her lit up her messy hair. 1 second of silence, then a sigh. "I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. I need a place to crash, just for a few days. That's all." She didn't ask anything else, just stepped aside to let him in. A small, cluttered studio apartment, the air a mix of scented wax and cold takeout. The long couch against the wall was the only spot big enough to lie down. Troy didn't complain. They used to love each other, used to fall apart over differences they couldn't fix. Getting back together wasn't really what this was. It felt more like two survivors stuck in the same lifeboat during a storm. No one was expecting it. No one was thrilled. But at least, there was still room to breathe. The next morning, Hope left for work. Troy sat alone, opened his laptop, and signed up to volunteer at a behavioral research center near his old campus. He knew he couldn't live off an ex's kindness forever, and he didn't want to. They weren't anything to each other anymore except shared memories. The center didn't pay much, almost nothing. But Troy had a reason for choosing it. They were running a program in collaboration with AI developers, building a machine learning system to identify hidden behaviors in crowds, a blend of psychology, behavior analysis, and tech. Exactly the kind of thing that would have made his father furious enough to spit blood. Troy didn't say much. He just observed, took notes, challenged ideas. The staff quickly picked up on his uncanny ability to read micro-expressions, analyze posture, and gauge emotions from just a few interactions. He wasn't trying to sound smart. He just spoke at the right moments, and always cut straight to the point. That's what made him stand out. A few weeks later, a man showed up after a team meeting, introduced himself as an agent from a federal behavioral analysis unit. He didn't say much, just handed Troy a card and said, "If you're not afraid of working with real data, give me a call." Troy didn't take long to decide. He knew opportunities like that weren't made for hesitation. 2 months later, he officially started working as a behavioral analyst for a federal unit focused on abnormal behavior, everything from stalkers to community violence. The job wasn't flashy, didn't come with fame, but it was demanding. And Troy preferred mental challenges over what people like to call status. He moved out of Hope's place after getting his first paycheck. No drama, no messy goodbye. Just one evening, he left the keys on the table with a note, "Thanks for opening the door." Hope texted later, "Stop doing everything on your own all the time, Troy." He didn't reply. Not out of anger, he just didn't know how to say anything that felt true enough. The new apartment was small and far from the city center. Rent was cheap, no frills, but quiet. Troy spent most of his off hours reading, everything from old psychology texts to documents on seized property markets. He started to notice something. Real estate wasn't just about buying and selling, it was about spotting hidden value where others saw nothing. Like reading a person, except this time, the subject was a rundown house in a declining neighborhood. He opened a separate savings account and cut his spending to the bone. No parties, no vacations, no unnecessary purchases. Every paycheck was divided with precision, 60% into savings, 20% into experimental investments, 20% for bare minimum expenses. Every day after work, Troy walked through old neighborhoods, jotting down addresses with signs that said urgent sale, foreclosure, or needs repairs. He learned to estimate value with a glance: cracked walls, sagging roofs, termite-eaten floors. They were like psychological scars in a case file. He didn't fear what others avoided. He saw opportunity. Life was still exhausting, still lonely, but different. For the first time, Troy felt like he was steering his own ship, even if it was through a storm. No praise, no one backing him up, but no one steering for him either. He was living, not flashy, not loud, just living, in the truest sense. And for now, that was enough. Troy never said it out loud, but every time he walked past an old house, faded walls, dusty windows, his heartbeat changed just a little, like spotting someone silent in a crowd, carrying a storm inside. He'd learned how to read people. Now he was learning how to read houses. The city he lived in wasn't glamorous, but it was old enough to have forgotten neighborhoods. Streets where the lights flickered nonstop, grass grew past your knees, and crooked for sale signs hung on rotting fences. That's where Troy found his starting point. He bought a dark leather notebook and started logging every house he saw that looked salvageable. Exterior condition, number of rooms, rough valuation, reason for the listing. He didn't have money, but he had time, patience, and a clear enough mind to know real opportunity usually hides beneath a layer of dust. The first house came from a foreclosure. Previous owner defaulted. Listed at half the market price, but no one would touch it. The roof leaked, part of the floor had collapsed, and the kitchen looked like it had barely survived a fire. Troy saw a damage map, but he also saw potential buried under the ash. He took out a hard loan from a private investment fund, the kind with brutal interest and unforgiving terms. But he didn't hesitate. After work, he swapped his office shirt for coveralls and taught himself how to rip up flooring, replace doors, and patch drywall with online videos. By day, he was a behavioral analyst for the FBI. By night, he was a one-man repair crew figuring it out as he went. 3 months later, that first house was listed again. This time, the kitchen gleamed in the photos. The living room wore a fresh coat of modern gray, and the backyard was clean enough for a cookout. Troy didn't sell. He rented it out. The profit wasn't huge, but it was steady, and it was his. He did one house, the second year two. He didn't brag. No social media posts, no water cooler stories at work. Every weekend, he drove to each property himself, checked the water heaters, tested the locks, spoke to tenants with a polite but distant smile. Troy didn't want to be seen. He just wanted to move forward. The only place his progress showed was in the spreadsheet on his personal laptop. Every row tracking income, repair costs, maintenance, taxes, and profit, updated monthly. He watched the numbers grow like an underground current running quietly through the surface of his otherwise ordinary life. When people asked what he did, Troy would just say, behavioral analysis. No one needed to know he spent his nights wrapping pipes and wiring lights in a forgotten part of town. No one needed to know that every dollar he saved followed a single formula: reinvest, renovate, rent. By year 5, Troy owned 10 houses spread across 3 different counties. All of them were occupied, rented out, and sending money into his account at the start of each month. He wasn't rich, not yet, but he no longer needed a government paycheck to survive. He had built his own network. No mentors, no backing. Just Troy, a guy who got kicked out of his parents' house at 21, now quietly owning the homes others had once walked away from. At the end of each week, sitting in his own apartment with the warm glow of a desk lamp lighting up his planner, he'd think about that first night standing outside his parents' door, tossed out of their lives like a defective product. And then he'd think, some doors close not to end a story, but to force you to learn how to build a better one. Stronger, with better locks. And this time, the keys are in your hands. On a Saturday afternoon in mid-October, Troy pulled over on a familiar street in the north end of the city. It wasn't the kind of area he usually scouted for properties, too close to his old neighborhood, too close to memory, but a crooked wooden sign, for sale by owner, hung sideways on a rotting fence, and it made him hit the brakes. He stepped out of the car, hands tucked into his jacket pockets, and stood still for a few seconds. Ash-gray roof. Front door once white, now yellowed with age. The front steps still cracked in the same old places. Everything was painfully familiar. 61 Lakewood Drive, his family's house. Troy never planned to come back, not out of regret. There was nothing here worth mourning. But now the house stood there, with that for sale sign like an open hand inviting some stranger to dig through the past. And he knew he couldn't just walk away. Back home, he pulled up the property records. Within an hour, he had the answer. The house was listed under a temporary legal holding company, usually the final step when a seller needs fast cash or is facing asset seizure. One more click, and the whole story unfolded like a slow-motion detonation. Donald Hale, once a respected attorney, had been disbarred after being caught manipulating evidence in a multi-million-dollar civil case. Lorraine was under investigation for casting a ruling with a major conflict of interest. Both denied everything. But the legal world doesn't forgive easily. The court didn't need a conviction to kill a career. It all collapsed quietly, cleanly, like the snap of a finger. Troy didn't tell anyone. He contacted the attorney representing a shell company he'd set up 2 years earlier. No name tied to him, no trail. Just a real estate investment entity offering a bottom dollar bid for 61 Lakewood Drive. 3 weeks later, the deal closed. He was now the legal owner of the house that had thrown him out into the night without a moon. No one knew except him and a notarized document. Troy didn't move in. He hired his usual crew to convert the 3-bedroom home into a duplex, split down the middle, each unit with its own entrance, its own systems, properly soundproofed. Nothing left to remember. He had the whole place repainted, every old lock removed, the attic demolished, the same attic where his father used to store court rulings and framed awards. He turned the house into an asset, a line in a spreadsheet, a stream of income. 2 months after renovations, the duplex was listed through Troy's property management company. Less than a week later, the office received a rental application from a couple, Donald and Lorraine Hale. Troy didn't react at first, just stared at the screen for a few silent seconds. The assistant's email was brief. Older couple, polite, low credit score, but willing to pay 2 months up front. Approve? He typed a short reply, approved. The assistant scheduled a showing. They wanted to see the unit Friday afternoon. Troy reread the address and felt his heartbeat stumble for a moment. Not from anger, not from satisfaction, just from the sheer weight of irony. After all these years, in a city of thousands of homes, they had somehow chosen to return to the very place that had cast him out like a stray. And now they were coming back, but not as homeowners, as tenants. In a house that no longer belonged to them. No family photos on the wall, no authority to shut their son out. No authority at all. Troy didn't schedule a face-to-face. There was no need. They'd find out soon enough. No announcement, no warning. Just a door opening. And the person on the other side wasn't the man who used to own the place. It was the one they once said didn't deserve to carry the Hale name. They moved in on an early spring afternoon, the kind of day when the breeze is just cold enough to keep jackets on, but not zipped up. An old pickup truck rolled in, its bed packed with cardboard boxes, a few wrinkled fabric bags, and one lone nightstand. The assistant from the property management company was already there, holding a clipboard with the lease paperwork. Standing beside her was the person authorized to sign on behalf of the owner. That person was Troy. They didn't recognize him right away. Donald stepped out first, worn khakis fraying at the cuffs, an old white shirt pressed neatly, but still clinging to deep creases time couldn't iron out. Lorraine followed, smaller than she was 5 years ago. No makeup, still wearing the tarnished silver wedding ring. Troy wasn't in office clothes, just a plain gray t-shirt and dark jeans, leaning casually against the front porch rail. They passed him without a second glance, like he was just some maintenance guy. Only when the assistant walked over and said, "This is the owner of the property," did Donald finally turn his head. 1 second passed. Then 2 more seconds passed. Donald's face visibly drained of color. Lorraine froze, her hand gripping the fabric strap of her bag so tightly her knuckles turned white. Troy said nothing. He simply extended a hand. "Come in. We'll sign the lease inside." They stepped into the living room where the family photo once hung, where a burgundy leather sofa and oak bookshelves used to sit. Now, the walls were painted a soft cream. The flooring was new laminate. Every trace of their past had been wiped clean. On the glass table, the assistant placed the folder. Rent is $4,200 a month, includes system maintenance, basic repairs, and scheduled trash pickup. 2 months deposit. Payment due on the 1st of each month. Donald cleared his throat, trying to steady himself. Just wondering. This rate seems a bit high for the area." Troy still didn't look him in the eye. "The house has been fully renovated. New interiors, close to the city center. Market rate is $2,000. I'm charging $4,200 because I can." Lorraine spoke up, her voice almost pleading. We didn't think you, Troy, that you would. I'm not your son." His tone wasn't raised, it wasn't cold, just the exact volume needed to stop her mid-sentence. "I'm the landlord. These are standard terms you can choose to accept or not." Donald leaned forward, trying to reclaim some sense of control, but the weight he used to carry was gone. His face was still pale. "Listen, Troy, we're family. Surely there's some room to be reasonable." Troy let out a soft laugh, not from humor, just at the words. "Reasonable?" he repeated. "Was it reasonable when I became a stranger in my own home 5 years ago?" Donald went silent. The assistant glanced over, uneasy, but stayed quiet. Troy slid the folder toward them. If you agree to the terms, sign here. If not, I have 3 other couples on the waiting list." Lorraine took a small step back, as if someone had slapped her. Donald picked up the pen, his hand trembling, but he signed. No more questions, no apologies, no mention of the past. They signed, took the keys, and stepped into a space that no longer belonged to them. Troy stayed behind. He watched the door close. No anger, no sympathy, no need for victory, just a quiet clarity. Some confrontations don't need shouting. All they need is silence and your name on the deed. They moved into the basement unit just a week after signing the lease. The official reason: the upstairs had already been reserved by another tenant. But the real reason was clear to anyone. It was the cheaper option, and they didn't have many choices left. The basement used to be the laundry area. When Troy was a kid, Donald used to lock him down there whenever he was losing control of his emotions, which really meant whenever he pushed back, whenever he didn't obey, whenever he stepped outside the blueprint they'd laid out for him. That place used to be the coldest part of the house. No windows, low ceiling, and a constant musty smell that clung to everything. Troy had spent countless nights down there, curled up on the cement floor with a pillow clutched tight, silently counting the drips from the old pipes because crying out loud wasn't an option. Now it was different. The basement had been fully renovated like the rest of the house. Wood floors, soundproofed walls, heating, and its own private entrance. But memories don't get remodeled. Troy didn't visit often. But sometimes, maintenance checks, scheduled inspections, he'd show up, always with a property manager. Never alone. And not once had he set foot down into that basement. Not even once. Every time Troy visited, Donald avoided his eyes. Lorraine stayed silent behind the door, sometimes cracking it open just a sliver, then closing it again, like she was afraid the light might leak into the life they were now shrinking inside of. Once, while Troy was checking the electrical wiring in the hallway, Donald appeared at the far end, wearing an old sweater, pants rolled at the cuffs, holding a mop. He saw Troy, paused mid-step, then lowered his head and went on wiping the floor, as if Troy wasn't there. No one said a word. There was nothing that needed saying. Troy watched him for a long moment. The same man who once shouted in his face that men don't cry, don't break, don't make mistakes, was now scrubbing dust from the floor with shaking hands. Partly from age, partly from the long fall. That old line came back to Troy like ice pulled from stone. The weak make excuses. The strong stay in control. Now he was in control, yes, but not in glory, in silence, in quiet humiliation. Troy didn't feel satisfied, didn't feel hurt either, just empty. Like he'd run a long, brutal road to arrive at a place where everything was finally quiet. Quiet in a way that felt almost threatening. He turned away without a word. No blame, no mention of the past, no good luck. A week later, the management company emailed. The basement heater had malfunctioned. Troy came by with the repair tech. When they opened the door, Donald was sitting in a wooden chair, reading an old newspaper under the dim yellow light. Lorraine was making tea, stirring it slowly like even the motion might cause a spill. The room was neat, clean, but cold. Not just because of the broken heater. Troy didn't step inside. He stood at the doorway, watching the technician work, listening to the steady clink of tools echo through the basement. Donald stood up but said nothing. Then, as Troy turned to leave, a quiet voice called out, "Troy." He stopped, didn't turn around. "Thank you for letting us stay." A long silence followed. Then Troy replied, his voice as even as if he were reading the weather report. "I'm just doing my duty as a landlord." And then he walked away. No drama, no tears, no tearful hugs or last-minute redemption arcs. Just a landlord leaving his property after a routine inspection. And that was enough. That night, Troy went back to his apartment and opened the window, staring out at the city. Streetlights reflected off the glass, casting his shadow long across the floor. He didn't eat dinner, didn't play music, didn't call anyone. He just sat there in silence. Not because he was sad, not because he was angry, but because he knew finally he had taken back the one thing that mattered most: control over himself. No need to win, just the freedom to be his own. Life isn't always fair, and justice doesn't always arrive dressed as a verdict or wrapped in an apology. Sometimes it comes quietly, through the choices we make on our own, through the growth no one sees, and through the strength to stand tall when no one's standing beside us. Troy never set out for revenge. He simply chose to live differently. And in that choice, he didn't just prove his worth. He forced those who once dismissed him to face themselves inside the very house they once ruled. No fall is final, as long as you don't let go of the wheel. Have you ever been forced to live a life someone else chose for you? Or felt that silence was the loudest answer you could give? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. And if you want more raw, gripping, real-life stories that hit deep, don't forget to subscribe to Family Drama right now. We don't tell these stories to shock you. We tell them so you can see a piece of yourself in every chapter. Thank you so much for staying with us till the very end.